Caffeine and Carnage. My name is Jack, and for the past 8 years I've owned and run this cozy little cafe in our sleepy town. Life here had a rhythm, a comforting routine. Every morning I'd unlock the doors at 7 a.m. sharp, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filling the air before the first regulars shuffled in. They'd always come in like clockwork. Mrs. Klein, who loved her cappuccino with extra foam, Greg, the retired accountant who ordered black coffee and sat by the window reading the morning paper, and Laura, a college student who'd bury herself in her textbooks while sipping a caramel latte. The cafe was more than just a business to me. It was a refuge. The warmth of the place, the familiar faces, it all felt like family. I wasn't much of a socialite, to be honest. I preferred the quiet of the cafe and the soft hum of conversation that came with it. It suited me. Plus, the routine gave me structure. Something I'd needed ever since things fell apart with my family years ago. Running this place had given me a purpose. My right-hand man was Paul, a tall, lanky guy with an infectious grin and a habit of cracking jokes at the most inappropriate moments. We'd been friends for years, ever since high school. Paul wasn't exactly reliable, but he had a good heart. He'd started working here part-time about a year ago after losing his job at a local tech company. In between serving customers, he'd make me laugh with some ridiculous joke or imitate one of the regulars. "Hey, Jack," Paul said as he waltzed in one morning, late as usual. "Why don't skeletons fight each other?" I rolled my eyes, already knowing where this was going. "I don't know, Paul. Why?" "Because they don't have the guts." He burst into laughter, barely able to keep himself upright. I couldn't help but chuckle. His sense of humor was relentless, and in a way, it kept the mood light even on tough days. I handed him an apron as he clocked in. "Just make sure to bring that charm to the customers today. We've got a busy one." Paul took the apron and winked at me. "Don't worry, boss. I've got the magic touch." Life was simple. Most days blended into each other. Mornings with coffee, afternoons with the sound of clinking cups and laughter. We had our usual crowd, and by midday the place would hum with the quiet bustle of life. Paul would wander around, chatting with customers, making everyone feel at home, while I handled the orders behind the counter. Everything was ordinary, until today. It started with Mrs. Klein, of all people. She was out front earlier than usual, standing there staring into the window with a blank expression on her face. At first, I thought maybe she wasn't feeling well. Maybe she needed help, but something about the way she moved was wrong. Her body was rigid, and her eyes, those familiar kind eyes, were hollow. "Paul," I called over my shoulder as I finished making a latte, "come take a look at this." Paul, busy pretending to juggle 2 mugs for the amusement of a couple of teenagers at one of the tables, looked up and sauntered over. "What's the deal, Jack? Did Mrs. Klein finally snap? Maybe she's had one too many cappuccinos." He chuckled, but it died in his throat the moment he saw her. "What the hell?" Paul whispered, his usual lightheartedness suddenly gone. "Is she sick or something?" I frowned, wiping my hands on a towel as I stepped closer to the door. "I don't know, but it doesn't look good." Before I could think of what to do, Greg, the accountant, rushed up behind Mrs. Klein. He was moving fast, too fast, stumbling like he was drunk. His mouth hung open, and his skin was a sickly gray. My stomach turned as I watched him lunge at her, sinking his teeth into her neck. "Holy shit!" Paul shouted, backing up. "What the—" The cafe erupted into chaos. The sound of Mrs. Klein's scream echoed in the air, sending shivers down my spine. Blood spurted from her neck as she fell to the ground. And Greg, or whatever he had become, continued gnawing at her flesh like a rabid animal. The customers in the cafe stood frozen, watching in horror. "We've got to lock this place down," I shouted, my heart pounding in my chest. I ran to the door and through the lock, pulling the blinds down as fast as I could. "Paul, get something. Anything. We need to defend ourselves." Paul snapped out of his shock, grabbing a broom from the corner. "What the hell is happening, Jack?" "I don't know," I said, breathing heavily, "but we need to be ready. Grab knives from the kitchen. We can't let them in here." Paul ran to the back, leaving me alone for a brief moment as I stared at the scene outside. More people were stumbling down the street, all moving like Greg, like zombies. My heart raced, my mind flashing to the movies I'd seen, the endless nights watching Night of the Living Dead or 28 Days Later. But this was real. Paul came back with a kitchen knife and a rolling pin. "This is all I could find. What now?" I took the knife from him, trying to calm my shaking hands. "Now we survive. We don't open that door, and we don't let them get inside." The other customers had gathered by the counter, their faces pale with fear. Laura, the college student, was trembling. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I said, my voice rough. "But we'll figure it out. We just need to stay calm." And there was a loud bang at the door. I turned to see Greg, his face smeared with blood, pounding on the glass. His eyes, once thoughtful and calm, were now empty, his mouth twisted into a snarl. Paul gripped the rolling pin tighter. "I guess we're gonna find out if these jokes are still funny when we're dead, huh?" I couldn't laugh. This was no joke. We were trapped behind the counter, and the world outside was falling apart. The banging on the door grew louder, more insistent. Greg wasn't alone anymore. 4 others had joined him, pressing their lifeless faces against the glass. Blood dripped from their mouths, their hands smearing the windows with red streaks. Their eyes, those soulless, dead eyes, were locked on us like predators eyeing prey. "We need to block the door," I said, urgency biting at my words. "Paul, help me move the tables." Paul dropped the rolling pin and ran to help. Together, we pushed 2 of the heavier tables in front of the door, creating a flimsy barricade. It wasn't much, but it was all we had. "Is this even gonna hold?" Paul asked, his voice cracking with the same fear that gnawed at me. "We'll find out," I replied, gripping the kitchen knife tighter. "But it's better than nothing." The other customers were huddled together in the corner. Laura was shaking uncontrollably, her face pale, eyes wide with terror. She looked like she was about to pass out. The 2 teenagers who had been laughing at Paul's juggling act earlier were now crying quietly, clutching each other. A man in his 40s, someone I didn't recognize, stood by the window, his eyes darting between the door and the alley beside the cafe. "What do we do now?" the man asked, his voice low and panicked. I didn't have an answer. I was just a guy who ran a cafe. This wasn't supposed to happen. None of it was. But here we were, trapped inside with makeshift weapons and a growing horde of undead pounding at the door. "Jack, look," Paul said, nodding toward the side window. My stomach dropped as I saw more of them. Zombies, dozens of them, shambling down the street. They moved slowly, but with purpose, drawn by the sounds and the smell of life inside. It wasn't just Greg or Mrs. Klein anymore. The whole town was turning. "We need to get out of here," I said, my voice barely audible as the gravity of the situation began to sink in. "How?" Paul asked, his usual joking demeanor completely gone. "They're everywhere." I racked my brain, searching for any escape plan that didn't involve us becoming lunch. "The alley. There's a back exit in the kitchen. If we can make it to the alley, maybe we can get to my car." Paul nodded. "Okay, I'll cover the back, but we need something better than this," he said, looking at the rolling pin in his hand with a grimace. "These jokes won't save us." I ran to the kitchen, opening drawers and cabinets, searching for anything useful. My hands trembled as I found another knife, a meat cleaver, and a heavy cast-iron skillet. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. I handed the cleaver to Paul. "Take this," I said, my voice tight with fear. "It's better than that." He took it, testing its weight in his hand. "A cleaver, huh? Guess it's time to chop some heads." He forced a weak grin, but the humor didn't reach his eyes. He was scared, and so was I. I turned back to the group. "Listen up. We're heading for the back exit. We'll go out into the alley, and from there, we'll make our way to my car. If we stick together, we can do this." "What if they're in the alley too?" the man by the window asked, his voice trembling. I didn't have time to answer. Another loud crash came from the front as the glass in the door cracked under the weight of the zombies pushing against it. "We don't have a choice," I shouted. "We go now." We moved quickly. I led the way into the kitchen, Paul right behind me. Laura and the others followed, fear etched on their faces. The alley was just behind the door, and I prayed it would be clear. I opened the door slowly, peeking outside. The alley was narrow, lined with dumpsters and garbage cans. It looked empty, but I knew better than to trust appearances. "Stay close," I whispered, motioning for everyone to follow. "And stay quiet." We stepped into the alley, the air thick with the stench of rotting garbage. The sounds of the zombies outside the cafe were muffled now, but I could still hear them, groaning, clawing, trying to get in. We moved quickly, staying low. The alley was clear so far, but I didn't dare relax. Not yet. Just as we reached the halfway point, I heard it, a low, guttural moan from behind one of the dumpsters. My heart jumped into my throat. "Paul, get ready," I whispered, tightening my grip on the knife. From behind the dumpster, a figure stumbled out. It was one of the town's delivery guys, Kevin. His face was pale, his eyes glazed over. Blood dripped from a gash in his neck, and his once friendly smile was now a twisted snarl. He lunged at us, but Paul was faster. With a shout, he swung the cleaver, slicing into Kevin's skull with a sickening thud. Blood sprayed, and Kevin collapsed to the ground, twitching before finally going still. "Jesus," Paul muttered, wiping the blood from his face. "That was close." "There's gonna be more," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We need to keep moving." We pressed on, moving as quickly as we could. The end of the alley was in sight now. My car was parked just around the corner. If we could just make it, suddenly there was a scream. I whipped around to see one of the teenagers, the boy, being pulled to the ground by another zombie that had appeared from a side door. The kid screamed, kicking and thrashing, but it was too late. The zombie tore into his leg, ripping flesh from bone. "Help him!" Laura screamed, but we were too far, too slow. The boy's cries turned to gurgles as the zombie bit into his throat, blood pouring out onto the pavement. His friend, the girl, stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. "We can't stop," I yelled, grabbing Laura and pulling her forward. "We have to keep going." Paul looked back at the carnage, his face pale. "Jack, we can't just... We have to survive, Paul!" I shouted, my voice cracking with desperation. "We can't save everyone." With heavy hearts, we turned and ran, leaving the boy's body behind as the zombie continued its gruesome feast. We ran, our footsteps echoing in the narrow alley, the weight of what we had just witnessed bearing down on us like a lead blanket. The girl, still crying, followed us, her sobs growing quieter as we neared the end of the alley. I glanced back at her, wondering how much more she could take. Her face was pale, tears mixing with the dirt and grime on her cheeks. Her friend was gone, and I had no idea how to comfort her. Not now, not with death clawing at our heels. Paul kept his eyes forward, his breathing ragged, as we reached the corner where my car was parked. It was a beat-up sedan, nothing fancy, but it was our ticket out of here. I fumbled in my pocket, pulling out the keys with trembling hands. "Get in!" I shouted, unlocking the doors as fast as I could. "Hurry!" Laura jumped into the front seat. Paul and the girl piled into the back. I slid into the driver's seat, my hands shaking as I shoved the key into the ignition. The engine sputtered, groaned, but didn't start. "Come on," I muttered, turning the key again. The zombies' groans were growing louder, their shuffling steps closing in. "Come on!" The engine finally roared to life, and I slammed the car into gear, flooring the gas pedal. The tires squealed as we sped down the alley, narrowly missing a few more of the undead stumbling out from the shadows. "Where are we going?" Laura asked, her voice shaky. "I don't know," I admitted, gripping the steering wheel tightly as we merged onto the main road. The town was a nightmare. Cars abandoned, fires burning in the distance, and the streets crawling with zombies. There was no clear path, no safe direction. "We just need to get out of here." "Out of here and go where?" Paul said from the back seat, his voice sounding more defeated than ever. "The whole damn town's probably gone by now." "I don't know," I snapped, the stress finally catching up to me. We can't stay here." We drove in silence for a few minutes, the sound of Laura's quiet sobs the only thing breaking through the tension. The girl in the back hadn't spoken a word since her friend had been killed. She just sat there, staring out the window, her face blank, her mind clearly somewhere far, far away. Paul cleared his throat. "We need supplies, weapons. We can't keep using kitchen knives and cleavers forever." He was right. If we had any chance of making it through this nightmare, we needed to be better prepared. I thought of the sporting goods store on the edge of town, a place where we could maybe find something more useful than what we had. "There's a sporting goods store a few blocks from here," I said. "It's risky, but it might have what we need." "Sounds better than sitting ducks," Paul said, his voice steadying. "Let's do it." I turned the car, weaving through abandoned vehicles and debris as we made our way toward the store. The streets were thick with the undead, their rotting bodies stumbling aimlessly. Every few blocks we'd see one of them stop, sniff the air as if catching a scent of something still living, still warm. It sent chills down my spine. We reached the store, and I parked as close to the entrance as I could. The glass doors were shattered, and the interior was dimly lit by the flickering emergency lights. It was too quiet, the kind of silence that made your skin crawl. "We go in, grab what we can, and get out," I said, turning to the others. "Stay close and keep an eye out. If anything happens, we meet back at the car." Paul nodded, gripping the cleaver tightly. "Got it." We stepped out of the car and into the store, the smell of dust and decay hanging in the air. My eyes darted around, scanning for any signs of movement, any shadows that didn't belong. The shelves were mostly empty. Looters had already come through, but there were still some things left. Paul grabbed a baseball bat from a nearby rack, testing its weight with a grim smile. "Now, this is more like it," he said, swinging it a few times. "Heads are gonna roll." I moved toward the camping section, grabbing a few survival knives, some first aid kits, and a small axe. Laura found a backpack and started stuffing it with whatever supplies she could find. Canned food, water bottles, anything that might help us last a little longer. The girl stayed near the door, her eyes vacant as she stood there, not even pretending to help. I didn't blame her. After what she'd been through, it was a miracle she was still on her feet at all. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the back of the store. My heart skipped a beat, and I whipped around, knife in hand. Paul raised his bat, his eyes narrowing. "What the hell was that?" he whispered, stepping toward the sound. "Stay together," I hissed, motioning for Laura and the girl to move closer. "We don't know what's back there." We crept toward the source of the noise, every step feeling like it might be our last. As we rounded the corner of the aisle, my blood ran cold. A group of zombies had broken through a back door, their bodies twisted and torn. They were fast, faster than the ones we'd seen before, and they were heading straight for us. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Laura's arm and pulling her toward the exit. Paul swung his bat, smashing one of the zombies in the face with a sickening crack, but more of them kept coming. They were relentless. "Go! I'll hold them off," Paul yelled, turning to face the horde with his bat raised. "No, Paul!" I shouted, but it was too late. He charged forward, swinging wildly, buying us precious seconds to escape. I didn't want to leave him, but we had no choice. We bolted for the car, the sound of Paul's bat connecting with flesh and bone echoing behind us. The girl stumbled, but Laura grabbed her, pulling her forward as we reached the door. I looked back one last time, just in time to see the zombies swarm Paul, dragging him to the ground. His screams echoed in the night, mingling with the groans of the undead as they tore into him. "Paul!" I shouted, my voice breaking, but it was too late. He was gone. Let me know in the comments below if you want to hear more from this story. Please like and subscribe. Thank you.